Up next, CityNet 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
I'm Lloyd Anderson, President of the City Club. Welcome to our program today. We'll focus on the arts in the information age and how technological and artistic skills are being combined to form hybrid artists that are working in many new professions. Our speakers today are Will Vinton of Vinton Studios, Mary Vinton Folberg, Director of Education for the Northwest Academy, and Michael Pippi, who you heard not too long ago. Michael, Executive Director of the Regional Arts and Culture Council. Susan Oliver, a new member with a marketing professional in business-to-business e-commerce. Susan, you're here today somewhere. There you are. Good. Pleased to have you. Don't forget to RSVP for the membership reception to be held next week at Booter's Gallery from 5:30 to 7. In addition to meeting and greeting one another, member Bing Sheldon will present an overview of the restoration of the Simon Benson House. To RSVP, call Suzanne at the club office. On Friday, April the 28th, join us for a special program, this time on the subject of new urbanism and how it can be used to transform Portland's inner neighborhoods. Our speaker will be Jacqueline Grimshaw from Chicago, Center for Neighborhood Technology. We will also have a ballot measure to vote on, Measure 81, at this program. So we'll begin the program at 12 o'clock. Today's program is co-sponsored by the Regional Arts and Culture Council. We're very grateful for their assistance in making this program possible. Our program host today is Patty Tillett, member of the Board of Governors and principal with the Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects. He will ask the first question of our speakers. Following his questions, we can have questions by members of the club, either here in the microphone, or if you would like, you can write your question and we'll ask it from up here. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Portland General Electric, Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt, and Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation. We're very grateful for their support. Our values are measured by where we spend our time and where we spend our money. Future generations, I am sure, will ask, what were the folks' values back at the turn of the century, that's 1999, that caused them to cut back on music and the arts in our public schools at a time when the state was having one of the best economic times in its history. Our three speakers today, Mary Vinton Folberg, Will Vinton, and Mike Vinton Pippi should give us some insight into the situation. Mary Vinton Folberg is founder and director of Education Northwest Academy. She is founder and longtime director of the Jefferson High School Dance Department and was its artistic director for 17 years. She's taught in California and Oregon public schools for over 35 years. She's received the Kennedy Center Award for Excellence in Arts Education, the Metropolitan Arts Commission Award, and 3 times the Distinguished Teacher Award from the Presidential Scholars Program. Will Vinton is chairman and founder of Will Vinton Studios. In 1975, he co-created Closed Mondays and won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. not a bad start. Currently, he spends much of his time in executive producing, directing, and developing film and television projects, while Vinton Studios continues to expand in an increasingly diverse ways. His current productions include a half-hour comedy, an animated series for Fox, a sketch comedy special, and a pilot program for NBC. He serves on the Oregon Film and Video Board, the Northwest Academy. He's chairman and co-founder of the Portland Creative Conference. He comes out of McMinnville and graduated from the University of California at Berkeley. Mike Pippi, in over 25 years in film, television, stage, and special events, is a producer or director. Mike has worked in both private and public sector. He was president of International Cultural Enterprises, working in Los Angeles area and overseas. His work with Walt Disney, 5 years in Russia working in television, and his time in Monterey as director of the Froman Foundation give him a unique background to help us discuss the program today. So we'll start off with you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. It's a pleasure to be here today. Early in my professional life of teaching English and the performing arts in city schools, I began to realize that arts education was indeed important to students in a very, very basic way. It wasn't just a matter of dealing with a subject that excited students and kept them coming to school. Human beings have very basic developmental needs that only arts education fulfills. With arts programs, we have curricula that often don't deal with finite answers, but rather infinite possible solutions. The more flexible and creative the solution in an art class, the more unusual the style, the more imaginative the response, the better. This was exciting to students, taught them to think in multiple ways, and enriched their educational day. Additionally, the arts brought to the school curriculum the development of all of the senses that human beings possess: visual, audio, kinesthetic, interpersonal, to name a few. Development that traditional academic subjects, which tend to be mainly verbally and mathematically based, often ignore. We found ourselves with students who were diagnosed as educationally challenged. Now that's a 90s word. It was, I think, educationally disadvantaged or something else then. At any rate, this was the label put on these kids in their academic classes, and they were often brilliant painters or sculptors. There were students who were sent to our beginning level dance classes who, after our working on basic motor coordination, suddenly began to pull word recognition and reading levels up by 3 or 4 grades. Some of these went on to become professional dancers. Interestingly, these were often kids who we later would find out had never had some kind of basic motor development that hadn't happened in early childhood, such as crawling. These were students for whom basic education could not happen without an infusion of arts in their educational program. That education in the arts completes the development of sensual awareness and broad-based perceptions that human beings must have to enjoy, understand, and indeed survive life is clear. That the arts infuses into education what education in academics, i.e. verbal and mathematic-based learning alone cannot develop, is also clear, as Dr. Howard Gardner at Harvard University has so thoroughly researched and so eloquently discussed in his many articles and books about the multiple intelligences of human beings. I think we all believe in educating in the arts for art's sake. That is, training young artists in the arts. That's pretty obvious. And I think most people now believe in the development of arts appreciation. That is, increasing our enjoyment of the arts and building audiences for the arts. And I have mentioned already the need for curricula that excites students and keeps them in school, or at least loving to learn. But I think a great many people who support these ideas don't realize how critical the arts are in human development. What I'm trying to point out here is that arts education is very basic, important human education for any human being. What I've found at once fascinating and discouraging is that since I began to realize this critical role of the arts in education 30 years ago, arts education in many schools has dwindled to a barely audible gasp. Where in the 70s we had wonderful programs like the Artists in the Schools programs, kids are now out running or begging for money to add arts to their school activities. Many high schools have dropped music programs entirely. Yes, these unfortunate decisions are often due to crisis in school funding, and there is one, but some of these decisions are due to different priorities, lack of feeder programs, lack of rigor and effectiveness of arts programs, or the fact that of late most of those arts teachers have become temporary and are the first to go. 21st century educators must acknowledge that if the arts are as basic as academics, they cannot be thought of any longer as frills or extras or even electives. They are anything but something that if times are tight can be eliminated. Besides being critical, they are also terribly interrelated. Rigorous work in the arts from a very young age develops all ways of perceiving and learning, as well as aiding the development of high-powered academic work, such as the study of the relationship between math and music. So many of them have compellingly illustrated. There are some other more short-term offshoots of this kind of education. Colleges and universities love the student who has this kind of verbal, visual, and creative dexterity. And we're finding at the Northwest Academy that this combination is, in education, very positively affects test scores. Though we're a very young high school, our top students in our first two full-fledged graduating classes are in the top 5% on SATs and PSATs nationally. One of our 10th graders has been offered a $32,000 scholarship to go directly to Bard College next year and just skip the last 2 years of high school. These kids know how to think, write, comprehend, and create, and that helps them in an infinite number of ways. And I haven't even talked about the critical role that the arts has in basically nurturing us human beings, developing our sensitivities, helping us appreciate the uniqueness of each other, and enriching like nothing else can the quality of our lives. This, to me, would be enough of an argument for mandatory inclusion of the arts in basic education. How does technology fit in all this? First, that human beings can function in the 21st century without having in-depth knowledge and the ability to use technology is a soon-to-be-forgotten 20th century concept. Technology is with us, and it's here to stay, even in the arts. The musician who knows nothing about audio engineering and sound design will have far fewer options in work or play in the 21st century. The ability to produce, process, and quickly duplicate artwork in every medium will be more and more a process of technology. And I believe technology benefits greatly from users who are creative, willing to take risks, and have firmly grounded verbal and visual literacy. Let us never forget that technology is the medium and human thought and design is the message. The kids know this. I find more and more of our visual arts students heading for the computer lab to finish and produce an art project. Our student musicians are soaring into uncharted, very fascinating territory in music composition through sound technology such as MIDIs, synthesizers, and digital programs. They are often running in these areas, and they are also acutely aware of how much out of step education is generally in developing these interdisciplinary but critically important skills. Our ability to use and survive change in the 21st century is dependent upon our creativity and our flexibility, and our visual, verbal, and technological adaptability. We cannot predict any longer what careers our kids will end up in. Careers and jobs are changing too rapidly. But we can equip our students so that they have maximum options when they leave full-time education. They must love learning, for they will be in and out of education all their lives. They must be very creative and flexible, for they must not only adapt to changing job markets, but they may need to be very clever in turning their skills into something they enjoy and something that the world needs. They must be very comfortable with technology, for the creative uses of technology will steer many aspects of our future. We shortchange our young people if we educate them in too narrow or vocational a way. All human beings deserve the development of their own potential, an education that gives them choices, not narrows their choices. This means a new infusion of integrated approaches in academics, arts, and technology must become the norm, not the exception, in all of our schools, from the very beginning of preschool education to the most specialized graduate programs. Minimal understanding of this increasingly complex world and enjoyment of its riches, in addition to the training of its workforce, mandate a new, much-needed integrated approach in education. That integrated approach includes the juxtaposition of the arts, academics, and technology, critical education for any human being who wants to communicate and survive in our 21st century. Thank you.
Well, much of what Mary was saying is really, I have to second the thoughts in my comments. But I want to do it from a little bit of a different point of view and talk and expand on the significance and the importance of arts education to the workforce and to the economy in general in the 21st century. The changes in Oregon's economy and its industries over the last 100 years have been amazing. They are not particularly unique. They are a reflection, I would say, of what's happening to industries everywhere. In the 20th century, of course, you know, our industries were farming, fishing, agriculture, heavy industry, lumber. All of these areas, as we know, have already given way to high technology to a large extent, and to tourism. High technology is actually an array of different markets and sub-industries. Really, it amounts to communications, it's entertainment, it's of course electronic hardware and software. All of these areas are very, very closely associated with the creative services industry, something that we've started calling the creative services industries these days. Interestingly, tourism, which is closely associated with art and culture and so forth of the region, is also nurtured and enhanced largely by the creative services industries. Something that is going to, without question, be a norm in the 21st century is change. Change occurs at an ever-increasing rate. In the future, it's unlikely that anyone will really do one thing or one career in their entire lives. It's more likely that they'll have many jobs over a period of time in a very constantly changing economy, an evolving economy. It's a scary thought, I think, to some of us, to some of you who have had one career all your lives, and it's going to be a scary thought to students and people moving into the workplace if they're not prepared for that. If they are prepared for it, on the other hand, I feel very strongly that there's an incredibly exciting, fulfilling opportunity that sits out there with career opportunities that can shift and change according to one's personal lifestyle and changes. The challenge for education is really to turn, in addition to personal enhancement, as Mary's talking about, I think is to turn out educated people capable of not only finding jobs, but of contributing, of growing, of becoming the leaders of this brave new world we hear about or think about. It's also, the challenge is also to send out people in this rapidly changing marketplace who are always productive, who, no matter what change happens, can find and can adapt and can be creative. I've said many times before, and I believe it in my heart, that in the future, the only skills you possess that will never become obsolete are your creative skills. In the future, every technical thing you know, every rote skill you have will be able to be done better either by computers or robots or robotics or both. And another way of saying this is that the only time you will be completely indispensable is when you are really using your creative abilities, your cognitive reasoning, your problem-solving abilities, and your aesthetic judgment. We know that creative thinking and developing creative minds is a very difficult thing. There have been those who have said that it can't be taught. Actually, I think we're learning something else. It's coming out rather strongly. It's that creativity and the learning of it comes when an individual is actually exposed to a huge variety of experiences and knowledge. However, most closely, they are exposed to things closely associated to arts and to the practice of the arts. The arts teach you thinking outside the box. They teach you the ability to come up with and deal with abstractions. They give you the ability to think and ability to deal with change and in fact thrive in it. They give you the opportunity to develop problem-solving skills. And above all, and I'll talk about that later, they teach, especially in art projects, teach teamwork, which is very, very closely associated to creativity these days. My company, Vinton Studios, is a kind of an unusual, we create an unusual product in that we create animated characters for film, television, internet, multimedia projects. But we're very typical in some ways of a lot of the industries, I think, of the future. And I feel this way because I know that I'm competing all the time against the likes of internet companies, communications companies, architectural firms, publishers, and on and on and on, for people with basically the same combination of skills. I've noticed something, which is a gross generalization, but I've noticed something over the years as I have nurtured various people coming into the organization. You take two people, hypothetical people, one, say, very, very astute in technological skills. It doesn't have to be technological, but very strong, a master of one particular thing. And you take another person, a second person, who has a very wide range of creative, artistic skills, and I would say competent technical skills, or they're technically savvy. The first person might be the most valuable person initially, but the second person, in most cases, I would say, is able to advance faster and further than the first person. And it's as if the first person, having focused so much on the technological skills, has done so at the detriment and the exclusion, perhaps, of some of these other experiences, some artistic skills and so forth, and in fact experienced a kind of a glass ceiling, ultimately, in their career. What we're looking for could be called a hybrid artist. This is a person who has knowledge, experience in art and technology, a mixture, with solid educational background, foundation, and as well has well-rounded life experiences. Again, at our company, we have many jobs and many functions. Managers, financial people, purely technical people, receptionists and the like, all sorts of occupations that we need to have filled. Most of these tend to be relatively easy to fill, however. Where we do an incredible amount of recruiting, intense recruiting, is for these hybrid artists. We're looking for people, and they're not so readily available. We're looking for people that become art animators, designers, developers, and ultimately directors leading major creative projects themselves. When we're looking for that super employee, we're not looking any these days for Harvard graduates and so on. We're looking for people with all of these skills, to sort of name them once again. We're looking for individuals with very highly varied experiences, and I'd say street smarts. We're looking for classically trained people in several of various artistic endeavors, from painting to sculpture, architecture, music, theater, creative writing, dance, and so on. We're looking for someone who has mastered at least one of those, and it doesn't hardly matter which one that they've mastered. We're looking for technically literate people, as I said before. We're looking for people with a basic, solid education in humanities and an ability to work in teams. And perhaps right in there as well, we're looking for people and interested in people who have a lifelong desire and interest in learning. These are the prize individuals of the 20th century, certainly of the creative services industry. These are the movers and shakers of any company in this area. These are the innovators, and interestingly, these are also likely to be the people who spin off and form their own enterprises. In the end, that's in fact the lifeblood of any region is economically is the growth of these new opportunities, new businesses. The problem with current education system, I would say, from my point of view, are just twofold. One is that we're de-emphasizing the arts, mostly in the K through 12 area, I would say, largely on the foundation of budgeting and so forth. The truth, I think it's improper priorities, and simply that. And the other thing is that we're not putting it all together. We're not breaking down, we're not bringing all the various elements of this wonderful artistic and technical world together. And this happens in the higher education areas a little bit more, where we have unbelievable opportunities, great departments that have mastered their particular area, but are not talking to any of the other areas or to any of the other disciplines. Well, why is this important? Why is that important, to have this interconnectedness? It's important because it is in the intersecting of these disciplines, in my opinion, where creativity is the most nurtured and the most bred. It is in the team projects. It's in where people come together with a whole range of artistic and humanitarian and technical backgrounds, mastered and just experience, and work together as co-creators. They exchange ideas, they exchange points of view in an effort to generate some particular project. And that is, folks, the hotbed of creativity. That is the creative soup. It's interesting that there are traditional forms. Theater is one of those places that's always been a fairly, been great for creating creative thinkers. It's interesting because in order to do a theater production, you have to do it in teams. You have to bring together writers and actors and musicians and designers and so on and so forth, dancers. In film, television, multimedia in most recent years, this has been an enormous opportunity. There's an enormous opportunity, I think, for creating creative thinking possibilities, both in education and, of course, in the workplace. But it hasn't been happening in education as much, because in the film, television, we use all of those skills, music, design, on and on and on, architecture skills and everything else. And we add to it technical and computer skills on top of it. The educational system really needs to understand, I think, the significance and the importance of art and creativity to the industries of tomorrow, as well as, of course, to the individuals of this new world. The various departments and disciplines in our schools should, at some point, break down the barriers between them and seek opportunities to collaborate and cooperate. Education that supports the creative services industries will do this, and it will support students' artistic lives alongside their technology and their humanities experiences. Humanities, it's so very important. I can't stress it enough, but it's so also well established. It's very, very well entrenched in our educational system, so I'm not really worried about it. Technology, also very, very well supported financially, and above all because of the tech companies that are there to support it. The arts, on the other hand, are not, and it needs to be understood how important they are, and they are not well supported in the current sort of state of things. We got to turn this around. We have to do what we can to support arts in the schools, in businesses, and certainly in our communities. In closing, I'd like to say just one thing. I think there's some really good news in all of this. All of this high-tech, Brave New World stuff sometimes I think sounds outrageous and a little scary. What's going to happen to the individual? The truth is, what industry is going to need most in its employees in the future are, ironically, the same qualities that will most enrich people's lives. A broad and varied diet, maybe, of art, technology, and all the stuff that makes us really human. Thank you.
Well, I'm not really Michael, Vinton, Pippi, but I am an old friend of Will's. Actually, and Mary's, we go back over 20 years. We were all kids together, and I was actually working with Will for a time, and he let me mold a little bit of clay, and I think once he saw me work, I was out the door very quickly. But we're old friends, and it's great to reconnect now that I've returned to Portland and see that we haven't really changed that much. We've just gone down the road together. Those of you that were here a few weeks ago and heard Delane Easton speak, along with Stan Bunn in Canada, know that we are trying to make a case for increased arts education as it applies to life in general for a myriad of reasons. I'm going to bore you a little bit now, although it's not boring, maybe it's more sobering, by giving you a few facts that I found out about high-tech and creative services industry in the state and in the city of Portland. As you know, creative services has been identified as one of the chief economic engines in the city of Portland right now. A new creative service alliance has been formed of a number of the companies that are in the city, and there's even discussions of the birth of a creative service center, driven in part by the efforts of PDC, which we're very excited about. What is creative services? You've heard a little bit about it from Will and Mary. Actually, it's technology as applied creatively to advertising, graphics, software development, marketing, filmmaking, game development, internet, et cetera, et cetera. We are in the midst of a revolution that hasn't happened since the Industrial Revolution, and the world is changing very quickly. And our new relationship to technology is one of the reasons for that. The increased globalization of industry and trade are the other. It's making our communities very, very small. The facts are there are over 2,200 firms today in Portland with a total of 13,500 employees in creative services. The average employee wage is $44,000 compared to the regional average of $31,240. There are 800 firms that contribute to a total payroll of over $600 million annually. 5,000 new jobs have been added between 1992 and 97 in creative services, and creative services accounts for 1 out of every 10 jobs in downtown Portland. As you can see from this, there's a huge need for talent to fill these positions. Will spoke of the hybrid artist. Actually, I'm going to boast a little bit here. I actually created the term hybrid artist when I was with Disney in 1996, and my computer woman, who was in charge of our CGI department, took that to SIGGRAPH, which is the big computer conference that takes place once a year, and that kind of resonated with a lot of people. So now it's actually a real term, hybrid artists, which are people who are traditionally classically trained in the arts who can use the computer as another tool. We've always said you can teach an artist to use a computer. I think that's what Will's saying too, but you can't necessarily teach a computer person to be an artist. So we need creative thinkers. High-tech. The high-tech industry, as separated from the creative service industry, the high-tech industry is one of the top 3 industries in the states now. Next is tourism. Then there's still the lumber industry hanging in there. But things are really changing in Oregon. Nationwide, we're the 8th fastest growing in high-tech employment this state. Employment has increased by 20,000 jobs between 1994 and 98 in high-tech. The total industry payroll has nearly doubled between 94 and 98 to $3.9 billion in the state. Oregon high-tech exports more than doubled to $5.4 billion a year between 94 and 98. Between 96 and 97 in Oregon, there was a 96% increase in the number of high-tech businesses established. Again, huge, huge need for another new major industry in the state. Now the bad news. We are 29th in per capita spending on education in Oregon. Arts education funding is also not a priority. And when arts education is funded, it's often watered down to a minor exposure where really what's provided in the schools to our children is merely, I call it a taste of the arts. There's no continuity in programming from K through 12, from 12 through college for post-secondary. And this is a quote, Oregon ranks virtually last nationally when comparing the ratio of high-tech degrees to high-tech employment. The number of degrees in the state actually declined 25% from 1990 to 1996. We ranked 49th in the country. The question, where is our job force locally going to come from, and how are we going to train the people to take these jobs in our 2 major industries? Now I'm going to tell you a little story, and the other part of this is, as some of you may know, I was the head of recruitment and training for Walt Disney Feature Animation for 2.5 years. And my job was to travel around, actually the world, looking for talented hybrid artists to fill the positions in the studio. We learned some lessons, and the reason Delane Easton was here several weeks ago is because I actually worked with her because California ended up suffering from some of the things that we hope Oregon can avoid by approaching this problem early. In that Disney couldn't find people to take the jobs, not only in the state of California, they couldn't find the people nationally. We had to look even to Europe and Asia to find people, and this was not only Disney, this was the high-tech firms in Silicon Valley, the entertainment firms in Southern California, everywhere. And it was a pretty serious situation. There was no local job force trained to take the jobs in California, and it had a severe economic impact. So what ended up happening is we realized, and I think I said this last speech too, that because of arts education cuts in the 80s, there were no high-tech creative people in the 90s to take the jobs. That's partially the reason. Disney and had a very interesting thing happen when I was there that I would like to talk about a little bit now, because I see one of the important transformations that we can deal with here in the education system is the argument that not only public-funded education needs to be changed by public, but the private industry indeed needs to take a more active role in public education. Disney actually did that. And I'll tell you what we did. I was the architect of something that ended up being called the Disney Partners in Education program when I was there. What I discovered is that our recruitment procedure, and this is not unlike many companies, was literally we would go to colleges and universities for one day in the spring of a senior year student's life, look at their portfolios, and then based on what we saw over 2 hours in these portfolios, we would hire these kids into the studio and then train them for a year. So the programs and the portfolios obviously were all over the place. The kids had no idea of the jobs that were available within the studio. They had no idea of the skill sets necessary to take these jobs, and we were actually doing them a disservice not to inform them earlier in their education of how to direct their education for what skills might be needed to get into the studio. And I found this everywhere. We were recruiting US, Canada, and Europe, and I saw the same problem in every school. And in most companies it's like this. At best they have internships, but it's normally the education system is over here, and the schools and the companies are over here, and the twain doesn't really meet. So what Disney did, and I'm proud of them, and I think there's other companies, hopefully in Oregon, that will take this as a model, is to get deeper involved into the school systems, mostly post-secondary. We did this actually with Disney by adopting 13 of the top schools where we recruited, and we called it the Disney Partners in Education program. It included a freshman year job fair where we went into the school and actually said, this is the company, these are the departments in the company, these are the skills if you want these jobs that you've got to direct your education to go toward, and we're here to help you. Then we developed a junior year program, it was called a portfolio development program, where actually we put guest artists into the school systems for periods ranging from a week to a month to actually work with the kids to see where their interests were, give them master classes, help them develop their portfolio, so by the time when they graduate they actually had a portfolio developed that would fit in with what we wanted to see. We had a junior year, post-junior year development program called the Disney Animation Boot Camp. I've talked to Will and Mary about that. We're actually kids from these 13 schools after junior years who we had identified a year before senior, a year before graduation, as the stars. We took them, put them into our training program that was in essence a year's training program that we normally would do in the studio that we did in a month. They got to actually be mentored by our best artists, go through all of our training. At the end of the summer, were sent back to college with full scholarships and a Disney thesis program, and then a job waiting for them upon graduation. So in essence, it was a very sophisticated school-to-work program. We actually gave the kids scholarships. We gave the schools grants money for their art department so they could actually buy equipment, buy things that they needed, and we actually helped influence the curriculum. This was actually leading to a Disney animation program at Cal State Monterey Bay that was going to lead into something called the New Liberal Arts degree for the next century, which really is using art in a cross-curricular way, which I think is really important. I know there are different schools that do that now, but the idea is that art is everywhere and art should be spread across the curriculum. In short, what I want to say is that I took the money, I said I trained people for a year once they came into the studio. All companies train people once they come in. We took the money that was already there in the company for training and pushed it back into the educational system. This kept the kids in school, it gave them a better education, it gave us a better rounded employee, it shortened our ramp-up time and ended up saving us a lot of money in the process. I think more companies, as they see that they need to develop employees in the state, should partner, private-public partnership with school districts, and I think they'll find willing partners within the districts as well. The interesting thing about this is that I approached it on a recruitment basis, so we dealt with post-secondary institutions. What ended up happening after we got that program set is we thought, oh gosh, we need to get into the high schools now because we really have to develop feeder programs to go into the universities. So what we did was we worked with the post-secondary schools and their local high schools to develop animation/technology magnet schools in different states around the country. And the same thing happened. Disney actually put money into developing curriculum in high school and did guest teachers and all of this kind of thing too, that actually kept the arts alive on the secondary level and then fed into the post-secondary. And as some of you are shaking your heads already, if you deal with the secondary, then you got to deal with elementary school. So when you deal with elementary, it's really about the public school systems and how do you keep kids exposed to creative thinking and the arts across the board from the very, very beginning. So it's about the quality of life. It's about the quality of the human being living in the society. It is about jobs, now more than ever. And some of it is about actually teaching parents and teaching all of us that studying art these days and the arts in general does not mean that your child is going to be living in a cold water flat and starving the rest of their lives. And some of the kids that are even in the art schools actually were thinking that. There is big money in this right now. We were hiring people at Disney that came out of college that could barely maneuver or push a mouse around. And I don't mean Mickey, I mean the mouse on the computer. And these kids, the other thing is they didn't even know how to show up for work. You know, so there's no jobs, you know, how do you deliver on deadline? How do you work in a team? You know, you need to show up every morning at 8 o'clock. You got to do certain things. These are all things that need to be taught. But these kids were being paid like $120,000 starting salary. And the interesting thing that happened is as the industry started maturing a little bit, you started to see that only the best people with the best well-rounded training as human beings, the people who brought the most to the drawing board, to the computer, are the ones that lasted. So it really is about not just teaching people to learn skills so they can get a job. It's about, as Will and Mary have said, lifelong learning, creative thinking, ability to change jobs, and ability to survive in this new environment to build the new world. And it's the duty of all of us who are adults in this room, as far as I consider this, and it's my opinion too, is that it's up to us as adults to give our children the tools they need to build a new future. I was interviewed for the Oregonian when Delane came up here, and the interviewer said, well, what about all these great kids that are self-taught computer experts and all of this doing software? And I said, well, it's great that they're doing this, but it's not up to the kids to direct themselves. It's up to us as adults to not abdicate our responsibility to our children. And this is one of the big ones, folks. So I know we're all preaching to the choir here because you're all in the room and eager to listen to this, but go out and spread the word. We got to keep it going, got to keep arts alive. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. It occurs to me that when we look at the workforce today, it's becoming very clearly polarized between those who are in what you might say the intellectual employment zone and those who are semi-skilled or unskilled at the other end. There's a huge void in the middle, which used to be filled by artisans and craftsmen who are now endangered species. I suspect that one of the reasons for that void is that many people can learn from textbooks very well, but many can't, and they really only learn by hands-on and by demonstration. Now, some students are fortunate enough, such as the ones Mary referenced, who got into dance and their grades went up, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other students who never have that opportunity. Are there examples anywhere of not treating the arts as an add-on to our education, but rather integrating it with the core programs so that this hands-on approach that we find in the arts can somehow be integrated with the entire learning process?
I guess that's you.
I guess I'm the one. That's exactly what
the school that I'm running now is about. The whole proposal for that school was the juxtaposition of arts academics with an interweaving of technology, because we felt it was a critical education for anybody that wanted to work and live in the 21st century. There are a great number of offshoots that we're finding. The arts are required at the school. Any student comes in must take a year of art sampler, where the youngsters are exposed to every one of the arts elective programs that we run. And it's not just a matter of our teachers discovering talent or the kids discovering things they like to do. It's a matter of gaining terrific confidence and interdisciplinary ideas with the parts of these kids. I just walked into the computer lab today, and the students were imitating in their multimedia 4 weeks watercolor techniques that they learned in their visual arts 4 weeks last fall. And there were just some incredible things happening. Of course, we weren't able to produce them all because the color printer was on the blink right then, but we can't wait. So I think what we want to do with our high school, and it's a very different high school in many, many ways, is develop a prototype that anyone can look at. We're not right for all kids, but we're right for certain kinds of kids. We're ideal. So I'd like to see more of those educational environments developed. I'd welcome anybody to come over and visit and see what we do. And I think we are discovering some things that are relevant to all of education.
I'm Andrew Wheeler. Remember, I was sort of alarmed, maybe it's a vintage thing, or maybe it's because I still have white out in my hands when I go to work or after I've worked. But Mary Vinton Folberg's reference to the kids hurrying to the computer lab to create or to produce art. I'm a little bit worried that I see symptoms, when I see symptoms of the problem people have when they've lost the coordination between the hand and the eye. And I see less good, for instance, graphic design, which I don't do, now than I used to, because I guess all these tools are available when you click them on. So could you respond to that, please?
Well, first, I think classical training in the arts is vital, and I think these guys would probably agree with it. I'm going to let them comment on that. The girl that I talked about that was heading for the computer lab to finish her art project had scanned in a painting that she did. She's a wonderful artist. These two things are going to be mixed. I think we're dead if we don't have people who are educated in the classics. You guys want to?
I concur with that too. I mean, we were saying, you know, the things you bring to the computer and being able to use the computer as another tool like a paintbrush or, you know, a chalk or anything is really what computers don't animate, people do. And as a fine arts trained person, when you sit down at a computer and you've learned depth, light, shadow, perspective, movement, all the thing, figure drawing, all of this is what translates into what you put into the computer and then what comes back out. And unless you have those skills, what you produce is going to be a very limited quality.
To support that even further, the idea of creating something with a mouse, drawing with a mouse, is if you've been exposed and to the classical arts that Mary and Michael are talking about, you would discover very fast how unbelievably cumbersome a mouse is. And as a result, you would throw away the mouse very, very quickly. The computer interface designers are working day and night as we speak trying to solve that very problem, and they must solve that problem. Ultimately, all of the technology that we create, that is created, has to be accessible to people, to right-brained people, to artists. And that includes, in fact, things in that specific thing, for example, very, very elaborate, very, very wonderful touch screen types of ways of drawing that can ultimately then get input directly into the computer.
Betsy Warrener, City Club member, and I'd like to focus on one of the arts, dance. And if you could talk about how a dancer might fit into and be welcomed into high technology and creative services.
I've got a gem of an example on that one. When I was doing research for the school, I was interviewing multimedia whiz kids around this town, and I was led to different people, and one particularly visionary man said, "You must talk to this one woman. Her background is dance and carpentry. She knows how to work in 3 dimensions. She knows what spatial concepts are about in a very real way. She's choreographed for years and years. She's also built houses and knows what structure is like from the beginning, from the ground up. This is one of the best multimedia designers in this city." And I think that that's an example. When Will talks about the prowess eventually of an architect getting used to the computer skills that he needs to have, but then soaring beyond someone else, I think all those things are really relevant. Dance is something that is so personal too, that it's a great developer of human, not only physicality, but human. I've always found my dancers just terrifically confident and really believing they can do anything. But don't get me started on that. It's a wonderful art form.
Leslie Toomey, City Club member. I was interested in Will's comment that the only job skill that he sees in the future will be that of creativity, and I started working on that as I was listening to the rest of the talks, and I came up with another one that I think is very important, and that is people skills. And both Will and Mike then later referred to the importance of being able to work in teams, and I wondered if any of you would care to comment on how arts education, particularly performing arts, is relevant to building people skills.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm having come out of theater and running also a children's theater school at one point where I've seen children totally transformed. Thanks to Isabel, I'm in theater. I'm seeing her sitting out there, Isabel Chappell. I always think of her because she started me out in my career. But the idea of children working or people working together toward a common goal that's a finished product in terms of teamwork is what it's really all about. Theater actually does that. It's a group of people ranging from the designers and everything, then identifying the concept, honing it, getting the actors together, doing the casting, costuming, lights, rehearsals, et cetera, to a product that opens on a certain night before an audience where you have to meet a deadline is a very interesting concept. And it was interesting when I went to work at Disney. By the way, one of the chief things they said in their job criteria were people with theater background would be preferentially, were treated with deference. And I was always wondering why they wanted the people with theater background. And it was because of the teamwork aspect that you're referring to, Leslie. The fact that you can work with other people to get something done.
Hi, I'm Leslie Tugman, City Club member. And Michael, you touched on the word internship, which piqued my interest, but I wondered if any from the panel would care to comment on the value of internships towards this issue of workforce development, of honing classroom learning and connecting that to a career. The Creative Service Alliance has acknowledged and identified internships as a way to fill that employment gap, and I wondered if we could hear some more about that.
Well, I for one, think that internships are a great way to sort of move this process ahead, bring kids into the workplace, discover more opportunities. But I don't think I think it's a stop. Frankly, I'm excited about that happening, but happening as an interim kind of solution to the education sort of catching up with it. In fact, I think there's a whole lot of things that we need to do in the industry to sort of stopgap measures, I would say, to support and to nurture and train. Frankly, a lot of the companies that are in the creative services areas have their own apprenticeship programs, they have their own internship programs, they have sometimes, as we have even elaborate sort of training, internal on-the-job sort of training programs that are for our employees, just to advance them, just to sort of bring them along. It wouldn't have to be that way quite so much if, in fact, the rest of the society of the West of the educational institutions and the educational experience that we have was a little bit more oriented to some of this stuff, like teamwork that was discussed and so on. At this point, even if you get a classical education, you may get an excellent education and an excellent school, but you're still sort of in that place of working in very departmentalized sort of structure, learning one thing. And what you need to do, what every student, what every individual needs to do, is to take that experience, those varied experiences, and then kind of pull them together somehow. One of the things and that can happen through, I think, things like internship projects. But ultimately, I'd like to see that happen, throughout the educational system itself.
Could I make a quick comment on that? At the secondary level, at the high school level, as part of our fourth-year program, we have, as a matter of course, internships in the real world. We do have to be very careful at the secondary level about placement and about the kids that we place, because if they don't have the skills, I mean, I want to place students over with Will that he ends up wanting to hire, because hopefully then these kids will have a summer job and they'll have an interest in it, or they may decide that I don't have the patience to fiddle around with a bunch of clay all day long. So in any case, we want them to be likely candidates. They have to be, the across-the-board internship programs are very, very difficult, I think, for everybody, where kids really haven't been screened well for the qualities that will enhance industry and that they can learn from in those situations.
We have a written question here. Some of the best artwork is done by kindergartners. How can art teachers avoid killing the imaginative child brain?
Boy, that's a good one.
Yes or no?
Well, I think if they were, whoever asked that question, were you in the audience when Betty, Edwards, and Delane were here? I don't know, I wouldn't say, you don't have to say who you are, but anyway, how you can keep from killing it is it's actually teaching perception and teaching people to keep their imaginations alive. And to me, it's like keeping the arts alive. That's
creative
your right brain.
Kids are also a huge handful. And no teacher that has 40, 45 kids in their class is going to be patient enough for the really bright, creative kids that often lose out in our system, that are falling through the cracks in our system. We get applicants from the bright, creative kids, our profile, who have become very disillusioned with education. So I think that we have to first lower our class sizes, and we have to be very tolerant of the creative imagination of our children and let them go in directions. It doesn't mean we can't give them technique and discipline and work habits, and it doesn't mean that we can't problem solve along the way toward learning in the arts. And it doesn't mean that we can't make things exciting for them in the arts, but they also have to have those other things, and we have to be very open about it and have to have small enough classes to be able to do all that.
We've got time for one brief question.
Okay, I'll be brief. Jim Harris, City Club member. You've mentioned the fragmented curriculum in many schools and the fact that the arts are just kind of pasted in or inserted as sort of a plug-in. Has anybody tried to take the arts as the core and then have math, science, English, social studies, all of that radiating out from that core? In other words, reverse the paradigm.
Well, we basically juxtapose those two general areas. So we may not reverse the paradigm, although I think that the arts do permeate all of our academic classes. For example, we've had mathematical artists, and there's a wonderful man in this area who does sculpting by mathematical formula, and the kids really loved that because his chairs were very, very far out. So we try to do a lot of mixing of those things. I'm not sure. I think students need to have basic verbal and mathematical literacy. I'm not sure I'm going to just put that aside to the extent that the kids have visual and kinesthetic literacy. I think that they all work together. So my theory is the juxtaposition is the very, very best combination.
Lloyd, before we close, I just wanted to cap this by saying I'd like to invite everybody in the audience and all of our listeners to the March 4th Arts at the Heart of Learning Conference, which is RAC's May 4th, I'm sorry, I forget what month I'm in. May 4th, Arts at the Heart of Learning Conference of the Language of Technology that takes all of this the next step. It's all day. If you want information, it's 8235-111, RAC.